Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Tech Backstage. This is Tulio Siragusa broadcasting from sunny Southern California. And I'm joined today by Paul Shustak, who is the CEO of OpenWorld Labs. Welcome to the show. Paul, it's good to have you.
Thanks so much, Tulio. Great to be here.
We're having another design thinking oriented conversation today where we go through 5 key questions to figure out how companies are leveraging connecting with people to drive innovation. That's really the main focus that we're trying to learn, and the tools and methodologies being used to do that. So stay with us as we go through this journey. But before we do that, let's get to know our guests a little bit. Paul, if you could tell us about yourself, tell us about OpenWorld Labs, tell us about your mission. We appreciate to hear that from you.
Sure. So my career breaks down into what I would say is 3 distinct chapters. Chapter 1, I worked for some big tech companies, leading product teams, Adobe, Microsoft, Sony primarily. Chapter 2, I was a serial founder, mostly for Web2 companies. Launched and sold a elder care platform called Karen.care, and also a company called Core Water, and did about 5-6 startups, had a couple exits, and then about 2 years ago pivoted fully into Web3, and that's where I am today. And I assume we'll get into that. And OpenWorld Labs, okay, so that's a new company that was started by some investors who hired me as the CEO. And the vision behind OpenWorld Labs is to create what we call tokenized communities for humanity's passions. And tokens could be NFTs or fungible tokens, like we issue our own cryptocurrency, and to use those tokens to give members of the community ownership of the community and voting power in the community, and incentivize certain behaviors on the part of the community. And our first project where we're trying out some of these ideas is called Wine World. And Wine World is we call it an NFT powered community for wine enthusiasts. And maybe we get it. Should I go deeper into Wine World, or should I stop there?
That's good. We'll touch on it a little bit. We'll figure out how you guys apply some of these principles. But today we're talking about bringing Web3 to the masses and serving the needs of people in a digital world. You touched on that a little bit. Love the philosophy behind OpenWorld Labs. It very much resonates with a lot of how we operate here as a company, and some of the other movements that I've co-founded with some other folks around this, radicalpurpose.org. So this should be a really interesting conversation. And it also is very centered around why design thinking is so important, because it's all about people, serving the emotional needs of people. So let's get right into it. And as we go through it, maybe we could draw some examples of how you've applied this to Wine World, for example. Let's start with the first question today to kick this off. How do you go about engaging people to gain a deeper understanding of the problems you're solving to drive innovation opportunities? Tell us a little bit about how that's worked for you. You've done it several times in your career, and maybe how you're doing that today to really engage and understand what is it that you guys are solving? What is it that you're serving the needs of the people? How do you engage to do that?
Yeah, so I would divide the answer to that question into the Web 2 version of the answer and the Web 3 version of the answer. And
love it.
In the Web 2 world, there was a lot less transparency. I mean, we would go behind the scenes and do focus groups or surveys. Sometimes you'd have a user panel that you could poll or do usability tests with, sort of behind the scenes. But there was always this desire, need, motivation to create a more of a buttoned up view of product development to the outside world. Like, hey, we've got this figured out. You can ask us questions on our tech support channels. You can criticize us or give us feedback on our social channels, but we've got this figured out. The Web3 world is different. There's more of what I would call a build in public approach, and that's what we're doing with OneWorld and OpenWorld Labs. We have a Discord server, which is, for people who don't know, it's like a chat room with different channels, and we're very transparent about what we're building, and we're also very transparent about what we haven't figured out. And we solicit feedback from those members. We call them community members. I think that's an important distinction to the difference between Web 2 and Web 3. Community to us means somebody who has a stake in our future success, and because they have a stake, we're comfortable sharing openly with them design decisions or ideas, and soliciting their feedback in a way that really wasn't part of the Web 2 culture. So I'll stop there, and I can elaborate more if you like.
That's great. Love what I'm hearing. I mean, ultimately, it's the ultimate democratization of shared authority and co-ownership. So fantastic. So yeah, you can go and engage people and ask them questions, or you can make them part of the conversation as if they're on the same side of the table. That's brilliant. Love that. Let's move on to the next question. See what else we can learn today. What challenges have you had to overcome to increase collaboration amongst employees, and what has been the impact of that on innovation? So what I'm hearing from you is a little bit of you've eliminated the barrier between the employees trying to collect the information and the people, i.e. the customer or potential future customers, giving the information by creating a scenario where everyone participates as a member. Is that aligned with this question? Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so I should put a finer point on my definition of community. Most of those community members, we want them to be owners, and that means they own a token, and for OneWorld, it's an NFT. And so if we think of them as owners, then we really expect them to help drive the future of the product or the company, and we invite them to do that. So ownership is a big part of this, and there's this term ownership economy, which I think explains it in a broader way. Anyway, the question was about, I think, cohesion or communication and collaboration between employees in our company. Yeah. So, right. So the obvious thing for me is pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. Pre-pandemic, I was a co-founder in a startup, and we had an office in a co-working space, and we had a team of 6-7 people who would show up to that office every day, and there were other offices in the co-working space. There was just a ton of intra-company communication and collaboration, and inter-company communication and collaboration. And when the pandemic hit, we shut down our offices and we became fully virtual, which is also the case for OpenWorld Labs and OneWorld. And so that introduces all sorts of collaboration issues. We don't have an office. The great thing about that is we can hire from anywhere in the world. So our head of community is based in Greece. We have game development happening in Malta. Pretty soon we're gonna spin up software development in the Ukraine and Northern California, where I'm located in Southern California. So there are no barriers to geography, which is great. You can cast a very wide net for talent, but keeping those collaborations cohesive. You rely on tools. For us, it's Slack, Jira. We use a tool called ClickUp, also for project management, Google Workspace, and we're iterating as we go. Like I don't think we or the rest of the industry, knows the answer for remote collaboration, but that, we're committed to it, and that's the challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you bring an interesting point. A few years ago, this question had a whole different meaning, right? You could still get together, people operated from the same office. Now everybody's remote, so you have to use tools to be able to be effective at doing that. So let's move on to the next question. Now, you've got this community that's participating as with stake into this process, and you've got the employees that are set up all over the world, and you're getting communications going and learnings going and facilitating those kinds of conversation. But how do you go about synthesizing all the learnings to inform, for example, the prototype solutions to the problems you were trying to solve? So question number 3, because there might be a lot of information that comes in, and when you have a lot of good thought leaders, you end up with sometimes a lot of information that needs to be synthesized. How do you guys prioritize that so that it goes back to the problem you were trying to solve to begin with?
So we haven't solved it yet. So WineWorld, which is the first project from OpenWorld Labs, is still pretty early in its development, but we're about to run our first experiment in this area probably next week. So there's a feature of the product, it's called the ownership dashboard. With OneWorld, you can own shares in an actual winery, and you can participate in the winemaking process. And our community is excited about that concept, but they're kind of in the dark as to how that manifests in terms of the user experience. So there's going to be a dashboard, which we're mocking up this week, and that dashboard allows you to see the conditions in the vineyard, the traits and attributes of the vines that you own in the vineyard, and also enables you to make decisions about the winemaking process. And so we're going to share that mock-up with our community. And the idea, and this may or may not work, the idea is we'll share it on our Discord channel, maybe Twitter and Instagram, not sure, but definitely Discord. That's where we got the most hardcore group of stakeholders, community members. And we'll say, hey, this is what we're thinking of in terms of the user experience for the dashboard. Maybe we'll solicit free-form content or free-form feedback. Maybe there'll be a poll. We haven't quite figured it out yet. I think ultimately, as we go down this road, we'll experiment with different approaches.
I like that, but what's ultimately like driving this? What is it that you guys are solving? You mentioned that people come in as co-owners. Is it that they want to have more visibility, more transparency, be able to participate fully at their own terms? What's the actual problem that doesn't get solved today that you guys are solving that's causing you to create this dashboard? I'm just curious what you guys have learned so far.
Yeah, so let's zoom out. I'll kind of give you an overview of WineWorld in general, and the problem that we're solving is basically this. We view wine as I would say most consumers, people are either interested in wine or enjoy wine on a casual basis. They view wine as elitist. It's intimidating to them, right? So our goal with WineWorld is to democratize wine, make it friendly and familiar. And we do that in, I would say, 4 ways. One is this virtual ownership and virtual winemaking experience. So if you've ever wanted to own your own vineyard or understand how wine is made, you can participate in that experience by buying an NFT. Or maybe you'd rather make wine in the metaverse. So we're developing a metaverse where you can also buy land, or actually you'll be given land if you purchase an NFT, and you can plant grapes on that land. You can harvest those grapes and produce wine. So it's a virtual winemaking experience in the metaverse. There's also going to be a members-only community moderated by wine experts. And the idea there is there are no dumb questions. We're all learning here. So again, we're democratizing wine through these various experiences. And sorry, I forget the exact question.
No, that's the question was the problem you're solving, which is the need
Yeah.
to democratize basically the ability for people to participate fully so that they don't feel like it's out of reach. You know, it reminds me,
Yeah.
this is kind of a good segue into the next question. It sounded very blue ocean strategy where you remove the hurdles to make it more attractive to a broader set of audience. I remember one of the examples that they brought out was like Cirque du Soleil, where they removed the need to have animals and care for animals, which was an added expense and risk, and so people that would normally not want to go to the circus because of the exploitation of animals now suddenly would go to Cirque du Soleil. And then they also made it dramatic and fun, so people who like the theater could now go to Cirque du Soleil. So they attracted a broader audience by using a blue ocean strategy. So that brings me to the next question, which is what methodology are you guys using to build your prototype? So you're about to launch this prototype. You mentioned a little bit of the methodology, which is to remove the hurdles, to simplify it. But was there some strategy that you guys borrowed from the design toolkit that says we should do it this way and this is what we're trying to solve? Just curious to see how you guys went about that.
Yeah, great question. So let's take this ownership dashboard feature as an example. So we are fortunate enough to have one of the top winemakers in the country, both on this project, but he's also the winemaker for our vineyard. Maybe I didn't make that clear. We actually own a vineyard. That's what gives us the capability of fractionalizing the vineyard and giving ownership to the community. So this gentleman is both the winemaker at the vineyard, but he's also part of the software development and design team. And he's incredibly enthusiastic about this idea of democratizing wine. He spent his whole life in the industry, and he believes that, like I said, it's catering to the elite and it's scaring off the common, the mainstream consumer. So we have started with ideation sessions, a number of ideation sessions with him, and the core team is myself, a product manager, a designer, sitting in those ideation sessions and just coming up with ideas and using this winemaker as, I would say, the filter for what is a good and bad idea, because he understands winemaking and the wine consumer better than any of us. So we've ideated a ton of ideas. We've filled a whole backlog, and the next step in terms of refining the idea is bringing it to our community, actually getting user feedback. So all of this ideation has led us to this prototype stage, and then we'll share the prototype with the community, and we'll actually get some outside feedback. I will also say we did focus groups very early on with two types of consumers, two personas. So that was very early on in the process before we started ideation. And also at that very early stage, we created hypothetical personas that were not based on data. So we validated those personas during the focus groups. And once we felt comfortable that the personas were pretty accurate, we brought that into this ideation process that I just mentioned. I'm skipping around there a little bit, but it was
personas. I love it.
Okay, personas, focus group, ideation, and then in the next few weeks, actual user feedback.
I love that you guys really incorporated the feedback from the people. You didn't just go into a narrative based on experience. You're actively engaging people, and this brings us to the final question, which I think will also highlight our theme, and it's an opportunity to highlight our theme today. How do you go about validating your prototypes, testing them, and iterating to fine-tune them so they could solve the original problem? You touched on some of this a little bit, but maybe expand on why Web 3.0 can change dramatically the landscape on how people participate in actually creating solutions for themselves. Just curious, Wine World, is that one of the sort of also possible prototype of something bigger scale, the value of Web 3.0? I'd just like to get your thoughts on that and to highlight how we end up bringing this kind of mindset and approach to the masses.
Yeah, so I think it rolls out in two phases. The first phase is what we've been talking about, Tulio, where we're sharing prototypes and ideas with our community and getting feedback. And ultimately that gets us to our first release. Maybe it's an MVP, maybe it's more of a beta, more of a polished product, or maybe it's a version 1. At that point, we want to turn ownership of that process over to the community to a greater extent. And the way this is sometimes done with these projects is they convert the project to a DAO, which is a decentralized autonomous organization. Whole separate topic, but it's basically a corporation that is governed by all the shareholders, non-hierarchically. And maybe that's where this goes. But even if we don't go that far in terms of decentralizing the design process, I could see us decentralizing it in a more controlled way, in a less decentralized way. But you'll hear this word decentralization a lot in Web3, and it applies in two areas. One is to the way that transactions on a blockchain are validated. With Bitcoin, for example, you have all of these miners who are validating transactions, and because you have thousands of miners, there's what's called a lot of decentralization in how the Bitcoin blockchain is written to. But you can also apply decentralization to an organizational concept. So that's what I'm referring to. I want our organization to become increasingly more decentralized and in the hands of the community, where they're telling us what they want to build, what they want us to build, as opposed to the other way around.
Brilliant. I have to connect you with someone who wrote a book. Actually, 3 of them wrote a book about radical companies without bosses, without
Cool.
walls. And they've developed this concept of RADs, which is how you distribute ownership and stock in a environment like this. So Matt, Jose, if you're watching this, you guys got to connect with Paul, because these guys bring the pulse on what we've been trying to do with Radical Purpose for some time. So congratulations. Paul, it's been great talking with you. We've learned a lot. If I have to quickly recap it, if you really want to get participation from all the people involved, all the stakeholders involved, you've got to create stake into the process for them. You've got to create an environment where there's a sense of ownership, even if it's not to the extent of tokenizing it, at least to take that direction where people can feel like they have a sense of ownership. It sounds to me that is a clear path to really get to the root cause of what we're trying to solve and creating prototypes and solutions that actually meet people's needs. That's what I heard loud and clear. Hope you got some value from it today as well. Stay with us as we go off the air in just a second, Paul. Carlos, we got one more show tomorrow, right? Another design thinking show. What's coming up, please?
That is correct, Julio. One more design thinking show, and that will be with Robin Zander, the CEO of Zander Media, right here on Tech Backstage tomorrow at 11 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. So join us. Don't miss it.
Awesome. Thanks. See you guys again tomorrow. Have fun, everybody.